Welcome to MGSM. My name is Michael Wickerson, and I will be highlighting a series of scripts, probably 60 scripts that run through the master scripts that are provided for the parametric section of this course. Without getting too far into an introduction, I'm going to specifically deal with exactly what each one of these sections is about. And these are for recordings that will help you go back and learn a little bit of what's happening. So I'm starting very basically in Grasshopper, and I will have covered the introduction and the interface into it in our classes. So this should actually be fairly familiar by the time you get here to look at it. The first ribbon tool that you have are actually referred to as params, and they will go through the maths all the way through to the display nodes. And of course, the params function as containers for things. So what I've done is I've looked at the first script being params geometry. How to generate objects in the running environment is something that you should have been familiar with so far. How to draw things out, make geometries that are static, that are single iterations of what you're doing. But you want to make those what I refer to as ghosted within the Grasshopper windows so they can be parametric and they can change with certain logic and computational designs and techniques. So I'm just going to grab a few things here. Surfaces, curves, circles, possibly solids. If you're going to draw with solids or planes, you'll probably want to put this over to shaded so you can see that. That's probably enough. And what happens with Grasshopper, and we will get into activating the geometry pipeline, which is a fairly interesting tool as well, how to preview, how to enable, how to set geometries, and internalize and extract geometries. So right now I have a node that actually has something in it. And normally you would go up here, you would grab one of these hexagon-shaped containers that has nothing. Take a look at your little guide here and it will tell you that the floating parameter failed to collect any data. You haven't chosen anything yet. But what you can do is select right to left or left to right. Right-click on here and set one geometry. And now you have a piece of geometry that updates according to that. But you can also go into your set view, actually, into your, I usually have this in a different setup. Let me slide this over here a little bit down here. I like to have my visibility, and I like to take all my Rhino objects when I'm not needing them, and I like to put them to hidden. But what's nice is it's ghosted, and it's actually here, and it's recorded. And once you get an object into a container, you might want to right-click and internalize that. And if I internalize that object, I don't really need this one anymore. And this still functions, and there it is, and I can update it by moving it, and it will also update in Grasshopper. It will make more sense as we get into component versus containers as we go along. The next one that's in here is a vector. Very interesting about a vector is to right-click. Probably the best way is to set a vector, draw it out to where you want, but you won't see anything. A vector is an interesting tool that you actually need to put it to a vector display component. And now, since I have this one running into here, and I have it anchored here, which is at multiple points, you'll see that vector's all over the place, actually becoming this ghosted form of what it's looking at. That's a little tricky, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Right now, I'm just going to have this vector ready to go when I decide to visualize that. The next container is a circle. You may use circles, you may use arcs. You can do the same thing by dragging them in, right-clicking, and setting a one arc. Draw it across and draw it like you would in Rhino, and then there it is ghosted in the Grasshopper window. And then that can actually change. You can put in multiple ones and contain that arc. It's not technically there. One thing to focus on all of these containers, if you wanted to get it back out, you could always do it's baking, but it's actually very similar. Think about that as putting something in the kiln that's soft clay and then firing it into this hard clay. So you actually want to bake it, and it will give you a few choices. You have to group things that you want. You can put it on layers, but you can just hit the defaults. And what you have is that shape that's actually been put back in. And that actually is a baked version that's not that parametric model that exists over here. It's actually a new version of it that you could actually make as a copy. But I'm not going to use that, so I'm going to get rid of it. There's circles, so we could take this object, and it's nice to think of the circle. I could select that, and I could set it as one circle in there. But now it's saying, what circle do you want to set? And some of these nodes work differently than others that you've actually set that circle in, and there it is over here. So if you have one in Rhino, sometimes it's a little tricky to get it into one of these containers, and you sometimes have to generate it. So if I had the center of the circle there as a point, I could use it as reference for setting a circle in here. I find lines and curves behave differently. Don't really use the arcs and circles that often, so I'm actually going to get rid of them. The one tool that I use all the time, and will probably be your most basis for creating so many geometries and architectures, is to set a curve. So you can right click and you can set a curve to whatever you want, but when you click that, it's saying what curve do you want to set. So I could set that circle in, highlight that, and now I should be able to grab that. And I won't depend if I can take that original circle and I can go to visibility and I can hide it. Actually, I think I'll leave that down there. And now it's there in the Grasshopper ghosted form, but I also can internalize. And the reason I internalize everything is so I don't have to have an actual 3DM file that pairs with the GH file because they're different environments. So I'm going to internalize that data, and now if I show that other circle, I can technically get rid of it, and I have my ghosted form here. I have my ghosted point there, and I have my ghosted vectors located wherever these points tend to be. And they've already been put into that container. So just keeping with the simplicity of it, there's a few other things that I think lines are actually a different tool when you actually bring one in. Interestingly enough, as a line, when you hit select a line, it actually wants you to generate it like the circle. It's hard to select those and put it in. So some of them behave differently than others. But I, once again, never use a line like that. I usually end up creating it from points. My most common nodes are point, vector, curve, and moving right along, possibly a plane, which is nice to set a plane if you want, which is actually very nice, but you may have to orient different things for different things you get into, say robotics and tool paths. Let's just set one plane, choose it, set it in the X, very similar, set it up in the Y, and in the Z, and you'll see you have a plane on there. What's nice about displaying, if you go in here and sit, and your planes are coming up too small, you can view plane size here in this display tab and make that much larger. So I can make it 24 by 24. You can see that plane all of a sudden got bigger in size. Don't confuse the display with the actual display ribbon node. They do totally different things. This does all these components, whereas display gives you these actions. And we'll cover that in detail, and they'll come up. But components is what I'm thinking about. How can I get something? So let's grab something like a surface, which is a very common param. You'll see as we go down here and find the surface node. Where is it? Right here. I can right-click on that, say Set One Surface, and at this point I can select the surface. And you can see that one is now ready to go into hiding. I have it here ghosted. Actually, I have another surface here. Let me hide that one. It's saying Select Objects to Hide. Sometimes there's a little awkwardness in how the interface works, but I have a nice ghosted surface that's here, and I can always internalize that, and now I have it locked away for whenever I want to use it. You will probably think of these on layers within the Rhino, which you'll learn with Ahmed Hassab as well. The other object that I use quite often besides surfaces, because I think BREP's boundary representations are very useful, is I may use a BREP for this cylinder, which looks like this boundary representation, and I may go in and just have this all-encompassing geometry. And so that BREP I can set by selecting that BREP, and there it is. I can click on this BREP, I can put it into hiding, and now I have my BREP ghosted, and I can update it. Remember, these are just containers, they're not components of doing anything. Now this geometry is fairly interesting because I can take all of these geometries, I can put them all to a bake, I can put them out on the screen, I can leave the Grasshopper, these have all been baked back in, but I can take all those different types of geometries and set them as multiple geometries in the geometry mode. I can hide all these ones, and now you see everything is stuck into that geometry. So if you're used to working on layers in Rhino, you start to understand the use of this. So I did the same thing here as an example. I'm going to leave this. I'm going to select what's already in the example I gave you. We're almost at 10 minutes. I think I need to leave this. You can select everything that's there, and you'll see that I actually had produced a ton of geometry for you to play with and update and move around and see what you can do with. So I think you'll find that fairly interesting. And then you always can take those geometries and plug them into this node. I group these things, and one thing you might want to do is right-click on the group color and hit ungroup, because it just makes things easier when you end up playing with these nodes. Now what's nice is you can take all of these objects the same way I did, You can drag that in and put it into the geometry. If you hold down Shift, you can drag the vectors in. If you hold down Shift, you can keep dragging. You can keep adding things. And you see this geometry is starting to chock full of wonderful tools and objects into a single node. I'll get into a merge component later. Keep in mind you can always internalize these and you can always extract them. You have no geometries that are actually solid in your Rhino. I'd like to wrap this up, but let's go to display all of what's here. And this might be fairly interesting to think about. You're still scrolling around and navigating. If I went into here and said, what is the geometry pipeline? What is coming out of it? I would probably use my container to see what's in it, and I would just pump that in and have a look at what's there. Right now I have everything selected. I can actually turn off points, turn off curves, turn off breps, and turn off meshes, and you'll see on the geometry pipeline I have nothing selected. But what's nice is I can go back in, I can say I do want to see the boundary representations, and that's all that I'm seeing in Grasshopper from what existed in the Rhino window. So that's a nice little tool if you're actually playing back and forth with the geometry pipeline. But the main point of this 10-minute introduction was to get you thinking how to use containers, how to get objects from Rhino into Grasshopper, how to group them, how to play with them. We're going to move past these params pretty quickly. Thank you very much for watching.